screen starts glowing, and the film starts rolling. You wanna be knowing what you might be in for. So give the show a listen and find out what you're missing. Put yourself in position for the is a good score.
Hey listeners, welcome to the 198th episode of The Goods, a film podcast. Brian, it's theme month time. This is our 9th theme month. Isn't that crazy?
It is crazy. 9 months is a lot of months, and it's indicative that we've been doing this for 4 years.
So I'll remind listeners, twice a year, once for each host, we select a theme month, and then we devote 5 consecutive episodes to that theme. So this is my 5th theme month that I have hosted, that I have selected, I guess you will say. The way that we do it is we basically let one host pick the theme, and then they choose 3 of the 5 movies, and then the other host has to accept that theme and find 2 movies within that theme, which can sometimes be a challenge and sometimes not. Usually we're pretty good at finding sufficient films to fit the theme. What are some past theme months we've done, Brian?
The most recent was month.
That one's a little meta. I feel like you can't lead with month. People are like, what the hell are you talking about?
Well, I don't usually assume that people are starting fresh on episode 198, but I guess you could be. We always gotta have the door open for newcomers. Gotta have a big tent approach. We hope that word of mouth will grow the fan base. Our very first one was Circus Month.
No, Time Loop Month was first.
Time Loop Month, yes, in February. That's true. My first one was Circus Month.
That one was already kind of meta because it was like we're talking about time loops over and over again, you know? Your first one was Circus Month, though.
That's correct.
We did Train Month was a good one. You and I were just opining that was a pretty successful one. We got some good variety. The meatiest one that we ever did is we were talking about movies about making movies. So this is one that you came up with. So we watched 5 movies about making movies, and then you said, what if we just doubled the length of this theme month because we have so many movies we want to talk about? And I was like, yes, please. And so then we spent 2 months talking about it.
Yeah, it's like crazy idea, 2 months. But I thought we covered some good ones in that slate. It ended up being like 25 films over 10 weeks.
And then, yes, month, where every movie we picked had to have the name of a month in the title. Now, theme months are fun. It's fun to look closely at a theme and kind of come up with a lot of different ins to that concept. And not just that, but I think I like that we use it as a time to reflect on the concept overall. Like time loops, we talked about what would we do if we were in a time loop. That was fun for Time Loop Month. For Train Month, we talked about the history of trains just a little bit. Our thoughts on trains, our experience with it. Month, we talked about
the French Revolution calendar.
That's right. We talked about months and memorable months in our lives and our thoughts on months and calendar. Yeah. Topics.
Yeah. Month had the sweatiest premise. To quote Werewolf Bar Mitzvah, didn't really cohere. Not something tight and thematic like Train Month. Train Month worked really well. We had very trainy films throughout. And so what are we working with this time, Dan?
Well, I wanted something. I thought a lot about this one. I actually generated a list of like 20 ideas, so I could always come up with more theme month ideas in the future by referring back to this list.
We're never going to run out.
But I wanted something that checked a lot of boxes. One where you could get movies from a wide variety of eras and genres and tones. I wanted one that would allow me to think about things that I really care about. One that was succinct, too. You just say what it is and like, okay, I understand that theme. That's a theme. And so what I landed on is a theme month centered around fatherhood. I'm calling it Dad Month. So to be clear, these are movies wherein fatherhood is a central component or a central theme of the film. It doesn't necessarily need to be have dad in the title. I think you'll see when you're looking at this episode title that in this case, so far it applies, but it won't necessarily apply. And in fact, I know it won't apply to every movie we look at this month to have some variation of the word dad or father in the title. And another thing that it isn't about what you often hear described in movie circles as dad movies. So dad movies, I think, has a certain connotation of a sort of straightforward, kind of intense, but not just like that's intense is a little overbearing. I don't know exactly like. Well, I'll ask you, Brian. If I say dad movie, what do you think of when I say dad movie?
Oh, geez. I hadn't thought about that too much before this week, so I'm interested to hear your definition, or if there is like a textbook definition. I would think it's one that you watch with your dad that probably comments on a father-son relationship in some regard. I don't know. I'm a son. Speaking as a son, I guess there are father-daughter films too. One of my picks this month is going to be a father-daughter movie. But, you know, it says something about that relationship, and you watch it together, and the one that comes to mind for me, October Sky. I think that's a dad movie.
So that's interesting. So to me, there's a line between movies that dads like, or I guess movies that dads watch with their kids, and movies that dads get excited to watch. So like movies that dads get excited to watch for me would be like movies about interesting historical figures without actually being nonfiction movies, or like Westerns that are kind of dry and kind of cool, but not too stylish, or I don't know, things that like you stereotypically think of a suburban dad liking that kind of movie.
I get it.
And being pleased to turn on like cable TV on a Sunday afternoon type movie, you know?
Okay, so it's like, it's for dads.
Yes.
It's dad is the audience, and it's dadcore.
Yes, dadcore. There we go. That's exactly what I'm going for. That's not what this month is, though. This month is about fatherhood. So October Sky, I think, would probably be an acceptable pick for this month.
Right. And that's the mindset that I've been in, is I've really been thinking about, okay, because you dropped this pick, we got a little bit of a ways into the week, and then you committed. And so I spent like, a day and a half deep in the dadcore thought process. I guess if I were to pick a movie in that other category, I might say Gladiator.
That I think is probably a pretty good dad movie pick. Yeah. Yeah.
Or Master and Commander with Russell Crowe.
Oh, peak dad movie right there. There you go.
I guess Gladiator is also Russell Crowe.
Maybe that's what makes a movie a dad movie, is proximity to Russell Crowe. Just like your definition of a Christmas movie, proximity to Bruce Willis.
Yeah. I want to talk at some point during this month, I don't know if this is the episode, about dad music. What does it mean to be dad music?
I feel like we've talked about this and you have a bad definition of it. So we can get to this at some point. Yeah.
It's not a universal. It's a very specific definition for me.
It's your dad music. Yeah. But then again, that's one of the things that makes fatherhood interesting is we all have dads, Brian. Every one of us, by biological requirement, has a dad. It's one of the few things that unites every member of the human species.
That's right. And Dan is a dad, so I imagine that's going to factor into discussion this month, too.
Well, I think that's a good point. So, two things about me. why fatherhood is particularly on the mind for me these days. And I told my brother about this theme. He's like, oh, you're talking about fatherhood more? Because maybe I've talked about it on the pod before, but it truly is, first of all, being a dad, as you said, is one of the great joys of my life, one of the great journeys of my life, I guess. Like, I don't know. I've mentioned it before and I'll say it again. Like, I don't know if you've thought about this, Brian, if there's any like moments in your life where like that is the before and after. It's like before this is one half of my life. After this is another half of my life. I don't think there needs to be just one of those things in your life. Like there are important milestones everywhere that kind of change the way that you interact with the world. For me, the big one is before I was a dad and after I was a dad. Really, my perspective on the world changed in the way that I kind of, I don't know, thought about my life changed. I mean, another one obviously would be getting married for me. So that's kind of a big thing. And honestly, like probably the number one goal in my life is to be a good dad. So like that's kind of what it boils down to for me is like, this is it. This is what I feel like right now. I'm put on this planet to do as much as I can. So it's close to the heart in that regard. Before I move on, did you have any like moments or things that are like before and after off the cuff that you can think of?
I mean, I have some, not that would really make good discussion right now, but the Chipotle mile, when I ran the Chipotle mile.
Okay.
It's like, do that once, and then you're forever changed.
Is that just because that was like a zenith of existence for you at one point, or like it really did change something? And it felt like you had achieved something, and no one could talk shit about you anymore because you had done it.
The first one.
Okay, gotcha.
It was just, it was you said a zenith day. I am not a dad. What does Michael Scott say? I love in-jokes. I'd like to be a part of one someday. It's like, no, that's hoped for at some point in the future, but we will see.
And I'm hoping that we can make this month not just Dan talks about his thoughts on being a dad and tells stories about his kids. That's because we need to make this an inclusive discussion, Brian.
That's right. It's about the movies. It's always about the movies. Neither of us have experienced a time loop, but we could still talk about time loops. Exactly.
Yeah. But another thing is, of course, and I've talked about this, go listen to our episode on parenthood. I described this incident to me, but my father passed away rather suddenly about a year and a half ago. And so, fatherhood on my brain there as well, too, And I think that's probably more relevant to the episode today. Because both these movies, we're going to talk about two movies, are about characters who are probably about our age or maybe like no more than 10 to 15 years older than us, dealing with their fathers who are going through tough times and closer in age to our parents than to us, Brian.
Right. It's about elderly fathers, caring for elderly fathers in senility, dementia, just the difficulties that come with old age.
And so we'll dig into that. But Brian, my anecdote about your dad that I always think of with your dad is I went to an episode of filming your public access TV show. So I'm sure listeners know we talk about Gauntly here. That was the TV show that Brian ran for how many years, Brian?
9 years.
9 years. 100 episodes. More than, right? Or 100 episodes plus bonus content.
Right.
At least one of the episodes I was at, your dad was also at the filming. And he was walking up to people and introducing himself as Brad, father of Gauntly. And I thought that was just a great title, a great way to introduce yourself. Brad, father of Gauntly.
That episode where he was on camera, I credited him as Pops Gauntly, which we did an episode at one point about Pops Ghostly, so...
Yeah, not to be confused.
Little Action Max nod.
I don't know if you knew this, Brian, but my dad went as Pops to my daughters. So that was his grandfather name, was Pops. So there you go.
Some synergy.
Yeah, Pops Synergy. That would be an episode title for this, but I already have one penciled in, so we'll see. Whatever listeners you're looking at for the episode title, you'll know if we went with Pops Synergy or my other idea.
The greatest night in Pops.
So yeah, I'm hoping that these 5 weeks we can look at fatherhood from a variety of tones, and maybe each week we can talk a little bit about some of our experience with our fathers, or in my case, being a father, and maybe share some anecdotes or whatever the case may be. I'll brainstorm what some topics are. And I always like to have these little discussions during our theme months, Brian. So it could be fun. And now the main attraction. Well, another thing I like to do during theme months, as you know, Brian, is I like to take whatever the topic is and just look for like the core text. Not necessarily even like the most famous film in that theme, although I do try to hit those if I can. But like, what is the film that purports to be that theme?
It's the platonic ideal of the theme.
And the way you can tell is the title.
And it's, for instance, possibly best embodied by the Train Magazine's #1 train film.
Which I picked for Train Month, of course. When you did Circus Month, I picked The Circus. When we did Time Loop Month, we opened with a conversation about Groundhog Day, which you gotta. Not exactly the same, but the same idea. When we did Young Adult Month, where we talked about adaptations of young adult novels, I talked about The Outsiders, because you can't talk about the young adult genre format without talking about The Outsiders, you know? And so on. So today we have a double whammy of pure dad action with the film Dad from 1989 and the film The Father from 2020. There it is.
You can't get more to the crux than that. We got Dad and the Father.
Yeah.
The Dad Father.
I knew a little bit about The Father going into this week. I knew nothing about the film Dad. I would say they had a lot more in common than I would have expected. Just choosing things strictly based on the title. Then I guess like focusing on the father figure inspires a certain type of reflection. Maybe that's a takeaway, that these films are kind of similar. Filmmakers who are entering middle age, looking at their relationships with their fathers, finding certain uniting themes, I guess. I don't know. But what about you, Brian? What was your experience with either of these movies?
I had heard about The Father through Buzzed on Movies because it had Oscar buzz. Anthony Hopkins got Best Actor for it. And they always do Oscars coverage over on that show, which they just dropped their first episode in like a full year. So I knew that Oscar season was upon us. Oscars are on the breeze.
What about Dad?
Dad was totally new to me. I knew nothing about it. When my first glance blush impression was that it reminded me of Parenthood. Mostly just from the title, but also because you got like several generations on the poster. Oh, yeah. And I just had a spider sense that's like, this is probably going to be like Parenthood. And it wasn't too much like it. Some shared tissue, but I thought it ended up pairing really well with The Father.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think the film Parenthood is a good comparison because in both cases, both films are thinking a little bit about the nature of multi-generation, like how kind of in both cases, the main character is both a son and a father. And in both cases, it's made in the 80s and has like an actor who's better known as a comedian in the central role. What this movie ended up reminding me a lot of was this movie that I watched, and this may not be helpful to anyone because I don't know how many people our age have ever seen this movie. It's this film called Nothing in Common, which I watched during my Tom Hanks binge. And it's directed by Gary Marshall, who has made some movies that you are familiar with. He made Pretty Woman. He made a few others. Princess Diaries, if I'm not mistaken. But he made this strange film in 1986 called Nothing in Common, starring Tom Hanks and Jackie Gleason. So do you know who Jackie Gleason is, Brian?
I know who Jackie Gleason is. He is the star of The Honeymooners. Bang, zoom, straight to the moon.
Do you know who Tom Hanks is, too?
Well, tell me, Dan.
if only you had seen, I forget what it's up to. It's like 58 movies now, or I've seen Tom Hanks movies. So anyways, this was Jackie Gleason's last role. And so you had a pairing of kind of an up-and-coming sitcom actor and then like a classic comedy actor from decades before, but not in a pure comedy, and like drama tinged with comedy, I guess. And that's basically exactly what Dad is. It's got Ted Danson from Cheers. So have you seen Cheers, Brian?
I've basically seen no Cheers. I think we've talked about it a little on the program before. I know Ted Danson from Good Place.
Mm-hmm.
Probably some other stuff. He does commercials these days. He's kind of had another resurgence of late.
Yeah. Most people like Ted Danson. Both, like, people tend to like him on screen, but he's known as a very likable guy in person. If you ever read, like, actor interviews or, like, AMAs on Reddit or whatever, people pretty much only have nice things to say about Ted Danson. But Cheers was his big breakthrough. Cheers holds up. At least I saw it something like, man, at this point, close to 10 years ago, probably. But it's kind of like the distillation of a sitcom. The first season takes place entirely in just the bar. And I think they kind of keep the focus on the bar. They do expand it a little bit beyond that setting. But just like this cast of characters bantering and dealing with problems inside the bar. Funny, charming, well-made, good leads. So Cheers came out in 1982. So this film was not like right as Cheers was rising, but a little later in Cheers' run. Because Cheers went for 11 seasons. And so if this came out in 1989, that means you're probably on the second half of that, but still in the core of Cheers. So, and then it co-stars Jack Lemmon. It's a little bit like Jackie Gleason in my Nothing in Common comparison, but Jack Lemmon we have seen in a couple things, if I'm not mistaken, Brian. But the main one is The Apartment. Have we seen him in anything else?
Oh, man. I got to check the stats on that letterbox list that I made. That is a pretty useful feature. I kind of poo-pooed it when you first brought it up, but it's pretty cool. Shows you a lot of stuff.
So let's pull it up. So what Brian's referring to, listeners, is if you pull up a list on Letterboxd and you have a pro account, you can view stats on that list, which will give you info on a lot of different things, including actors. So let's see if I can find... All right, so it looks like 4 things, Brian, including Dad. We have The Apartment. He was in The Great Race. I thought that was him in The Great Race.
Oh, right.
I knew somebody hammy was in that, and it's Jack Lemmon. And then apparently he was in Hamlet, too. The Kenneth Branagh version.
That's right. He was on the wall. He's like one of the guys who sees the ghost at the start, I think. Does it say who he played?
Probably. Let's see if I can figure this out.
I think he's at like the very start. And he sees the ghost.
Marcellus? Who's Marcellus in Hamlet?
I think he's one of the guards.
Yeah, I think you're right. They find out about the ghost, tell Horatio in Hamlet. Yeah, okay. So I think you're right.
Yeah, when you said it, I could picture it. In this movie, he's an old man, obviously. He's got a mustache. And I spent a while in this movie thinking he was Don Amici, but he's not. He's Jack Lemmon.
Yeah, he's unrecognizable. I mean, he's balded. He's looks very old, and not just old, but kind of shriveled. Like Jack Lemmon, I don't know how big he actually was as a person, but in the movies, he never came across as like big. That was kind of part of his comic appeal, is he was like a little wiry fella. But what that apparently aged into was like a sort of hunched, shriveled figure, apparently. Which serves the film well, kind of jarring to look at. But a couple other interesting things about Dad before we dive right into it. The third generation that we're looking at here, the son, is played by... Who's he played by, Brian?
Ethan Hawke.
Yeah, out of nowhere. There's people in this movie, Brian. It's not the last person we're going to be like, whoa, this person's in this movie. So... Obviously, Ethan Hawke, a great actor, but here he's really young. So I actually have an anecdote about this, Brian. There's this video called Dead Poets in NYC. So did you read anything about this, Brian?
Only because it was the top review on Letterboxd, like the most upvoted review that's at the top of the list, talked about this feature that I guess is like included with the Dead Poets Society DVD. Of course, we covered Dead Poets Society way back in the day. But what does this involve? I haven't actually sat down and watched it, but I know the hook.
Yeah, so it's on YouTube, so you can find it on YouTube. And the premise is that basically the actors from Dead Poets Society, the young actors, a bunch of them, road tripped to New York City during the filming of Dead Poets Society, I believe during the filming of it, to audition for a role in some movie. And apparently you hear them reading lines from it a couple times, and it turns out the movie that they were auditioning for was this movie, Dad. And it turns out that Ethan Hawke was the one who ended up getting the role. Maybe not all that surprising in retrospect, but yeah, he's here. He's actually not that huge of a figure in the film. He doesn't get that much screen time, but he's at least thematically important.
It is interesting though, because actors, it's a gig job, so you always got to be going for that next thing. And so they'll be sitting there, on the film set saying, "Oh, what are you up for next? Like, what's the next thing? What do you know about? What have you got lined up?" And so even when they've got work, they're hungry for the next work.
Right. Yeah. And I think there's something endearing about the fact that these guys were competing for the same role, but they were kind of like going together and supporting each other and being affectionate towards each other, like despite the fact that they were ostensibly fighting against each other for this job and this fame and this money, I always wonder about that dynamic. I don't really know anybody who's like a professional in the performing arts. I know they tend to be tightly knit circles, but I feel like there's got to be some weird dynamics and energies and rivalries and competitiveness for stuff like this,
Right. I mean, that probably happens in a lot of different jobs. Is there a job that there is a pretty much bottomless demand for? Maybe computer programmers.
Yeah, but you're probably right. So like that kind of exists everywhere. And you do see that. You see that in white collar businesses, to your point. But I feel like in particular, something where you need to go out and like constantly prove that you're the best one, you're the right one for that job. You should pick me instead of someone else. Like my job, I'm not constantly trying to convince my job to hire me because I'm already hired, So like my coworkers, I don't see them as competitors because we're both hired. It's not like, unless there's going to be layoffs or something like that and they can only choose one of us. It's not like we're competing against each other. But I feel like for casting in movies, that's a little more likely to happen.
Right. And as we've seen in some of the films we've talked about, like La La Land, you're up against people who look exactly like you.
Mm-hmm.
So it really rubs in the fact that you're interchangeable.
Right. Last thing on Dad before we dive in. So this film is written and directed by Gary David Goldberg. And so the name kind of vaguely rang a bell. I couldn't have told you anything specific about him. But I looked him up and he's kind of one of these TV producer icons who I feel like less and less exist in the sort of fractured streaming universe where there's 100,000 TV shows and everybody gets a shot at making one. But it's like when someone would get their foot in the door and have a little bit of success, they would become an institution. So there's a bunch of famous sitcom producers through the years, and this guy is one of them. Gary David Goldberg, he made Family Ties, he made Spin City, he made a couple of other shows. I think those were his two biggest hits. And he made a movie too. He probably made a couple others. I don't actually know. Let me click and see if he made any other ones. Oh, he only made one other movie. So he made the 2005 rom-com Must Love Dogs. Okay, so he made 2 movies, and this was his first one. Dad. So here we go. We have 2 movies to get through, so I'll kind of keep this lightish. But this movie starts. We have the Ted Danson character. He's like a stockbroker, not really stockbroker. He's like a business executive, but in Wall Street. And his mother has a heart attack. And so he has to fly back home. Now, one interesting thing about this, Brian, I don't know if you'll agree with me, is like, I kind of expected when we saw that he started the movie in finance. He's a yuppie type. He's so fast-paced life. He's barely kept in touch with his siblings that like the rest of the movie was going to give him a hard time and have him be constantly on the phone and like having to make tough choices about going to work or going into this business call or whatever. But he just kind of was like, no, I'm just going to focus on my family from now on. Like he has one scene where he brings his dad to a business meeting, but otherwise I felt like it was almost like thematic backdrop that he was a finance guy. You know, it wasn't like the thrust of the conflict, which I kind of thought it was going to be at the start.
I felt the same way, that it was like they set up, this is what the movie is, and then he sees that his dad is old, and he's like, oh shit, that kind of happened. Time got away from me, and now I want to be a part of his life. And then that was the rest of the film.
It's like in the first 5 minutes of the movie. Yeah. So this didn't go the way that I was expecting, but he gets to his house, and so he has 2 siblings. He has this sister, and then he has a brother too, Brian. So who's his brother?
So it's actually his brother-in-law.
Oh, my mistake.
I looked this up because I was trying to gauge like what exactly the dynamic was, trying to understand it. And so he's the husband of the sister. And he's played by Kevin Spacey. His name is Mario.
He's got a mustache.
He has this comb-over haircut and a mustache. And yeah, it's just like, why are you having this creepy guy hang around all the time? And so at first I thought, oh, he's the brother, like you said. No, he's like the sister's weirdo husband.
It may just be me projecting all the Kevin Spacey baggage. There's like 2 or 3 moments here where I was like, Kevin Spacey's being a creep, you know? There's something, I don't remember what it, like at the dinner table one time when they're all gathered and he makes like some crude joke or something about, I don't remember what it was.
Oh, he's like, you're going to college, Ethan Hawke? Well, they got co-ed dorms now. And how can you possibly stay focused? They must have them on a different floor or something, because you just want to get at them.
It's like, thanks, Kevin Spacey, for that insight on being a horn dog. So, interestingly, I mean, I'm sure most of our listeners know the Kevin Spacey saga, where he was accused of sexual assault by other male actors and kind of disappeared from Hollywood for a while. And his like public response was, I choose to use this time to come out as a gay man. And I actually knew someone in college who had a bunch of friends who lived in New York City. And apparently, like, this was a very widely known secret that, first of all, he was gay, even though that wasn't widely reported. It was pretty well known in like social circles. And also that he would go to college parties and parties where there was a lot of young people. So definitely has a dark timbre here when he's talking about how can you focus at college with all those hot people walking around. Thanks, Kevin Spacey, for that.
Right. He's also one of those guys, though, like Michael Richards. Michael Richards a little bit different, but where it's like every character they play is some unhinged person. It's like, did you ever expect this person to be a stable, like, well-adjusted individual?
There's probably something to that. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe we can do like a Usual Suspects or 7 someday and talk more about the Kevin Spacey persona, because I think there's some stuff to unpack there.
And before the month is out, we'll have more opportunity to talk about problematic actors with checkered pasts.
Oh boy. Yeah. You gave me a preview of this one, and then when Kevin Spacey turned up, I was like, damn it, are we accidentally turning into Disgraced Actor Month? I guess we'll see. So this mom is played by an actress named Olympia Dukakis, who is a name that I knew before, and I looked up. I think Moonstruck is probably what I know her from, but she's been in a whole bunch of different things, Brian. Did you know her on sight, Brian?
I think I recognized her. I definitely recognize the name. Moonstruck, is that the movie with like Cher and Nicolas Cage?
Yeah.
Okay, I did see that, so.
But she plays the principal in Mr. Holland's Opus.
I've seen that as well, so that's probably what I'm thinking of.
Gotcha.
If we ever do Teacher Month, we'll do Mr. Holland's Opus.
That would be a fun one too, yeah. So yeah, notably it's the mom who has the heart attack in the beginning. She does not die. She's like, the persona of this mom is that she's very direct and organized and you might say type A.
She's domineering.
Yes.
But the sense that I got was like she gradually assumed all the duties in the husband's life. You know, he's retired, he's an old man, and she just started doing more and more things for him to the point that she basically does everything for him and has a certain way that she does the things. And like this has very much become her raison d'etre, but she doesn't like want to be questioned. She doesn't want things to change, doesn't feel like things need to change, but now something has changed because she's had this heart attack.
Well said and well articulated. I think it's an interesting portrait of these characters because you're right. It's unclear how much of this is just her nature and how much of like this aspect of she controls every little thing and she's a creature of habit and routine because she needs to do that to get everything done has just been assumed because, yes, the father played by Jack Lemmon, when we meet him, he's kind of disengaged. He's soft-spoken. He just kind of checks the boxes every day, eats the same meals, and goes to bed, you know? And they're like worried, well, can we even tell him it was a heart attack? Can we even bring him to the hospital to show him how his wife is doing? Because they're worried it'll upset him too much because he's just a very, not a very dynamic personality at the beginning, I guess. And one interesting thing about this movie is it goes a lot of places with this character. A lot more places than I was expecting at the beginning, to be honest. And
the arc is unusual.
Yeah.
And like you think it's going one way and then it'll kind of change up for a little while.
So the first act of the film, the first stretch is basically, all right, the mom is gone. The older woman, she's staying in the hospital. Now Ted Danson is here and he's going to take care of Jack Lemmon. And he kind of realizes, yeah, I really haven't spent all that much time with my dad. And it's great to be able to spend this time with my dad while he's still around and helping him with his routine, but also like kind of being a spark for him. It's like we get the sense that the dad is a little bit buttoned down in part because people like his son don't engage with him as much. And so we see Ted Danson encouraging him to open up a little bit and try new things and challenge his routine a little bit. And it goes very well. It's like very warm and very encouraging. Like there's even a scene, it's the one time where I felt like it leveraged Ted Danson's job is like he has to go to some negotiation or something. And for whatever reason, like one of Ted Danson's coworkers is like, yeah, just bring your dad into the meeting. And even though I feel like this would be proprietary information, like ongoing negotiations about acquisitions and stuff. But the dad is like writing down notes to Ted Danson, like, this guy's lying. He doesn't actually have whatever assets he says he has and stuff. And I thought that was kind of funny. Kind of sitcom-y. You could tell that this guy writes sitcoms, you know?
Mm-hmm. But the idea is kind of that Jack Lemmon has almost been fading out in recent years, and Ted Danson discovers that he's actually got this energy inside him still, this vivacity.
Definitely.
And Ted Danson is working to try to unlock that, maximize it, and make it last as long as possible.
And so we get scenes of them, you know, having heart-to-heart talks, and doing household stuff together and going out around town. Again, I'm not surprised that the person who made this is a TV writer, because some of the scenes kind of have the cadence of that, you know? It's like a sort of slice of life. One thing that I noticed that I thought of, like I said, they're doing household chores. One of them is they're doing laundry. Brian, TV shows and movies make laundry seem so complicated. It's not that complicated. Oh, you got to get the whites and you got to get the colors separated, or you'll end up like Homer Simpson with his pink shirt, and you got to do the right temperatures on the washing machines and stuff. It's like, to be fair, my wife, I know, stereotypical, she does more of the laundry than I do, and to the point that I do very little of the laundry. But like, I've done laundry before. It's not that complicated. You just put it in the machine and then you put it in the other machine. Like, there's not much to it. But I don't know. I don't know why this laundry is being this euphemism for, being a stay-at-home mom or being a housekeeper is more complicated than people make it seem. Because I feel like that's the one area I would not use that as an example.
Yeah, maybe they, over the years, have come up with dyes that stay in the clothes better. They don't leach into other things.
It could be it.
Because at least when I was in college, and yeah, it was like, cram it all into one load. I had these little dryer sheets that had the detergent in the dryer sheet, so that goes into both machines with the clothes. And yeah, it was easy.
Yeah. Or maybe it's the detergents that have gotten better. Like, they don't, rather than the dyes themselves, like the soaps you throw in there don't really make the inks leach or whatever, the dyes leach, like you said. So at some point, I guess because like the message gets around the family that, hey, grandma had a heart attack, various family members stop by. And one of them is Ted Danson's son, played by Ethan Hawke. So we have a baby-faced Ethan Hawke here. And he's got an earring, Brian. He's got one earring.
Yeah, he's got something going on that we're not seeing. He's got like a whole secret life and one part of his secret life is he hangs out with his grandpa, which the dad didn't know. He's like, "Oh, you're here?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm here a lot."
Didn't he say he lives in Mexico too?
Yeah, he lives in a commune in Mexico with like 2 guys and 2 girls. Probably in a house. Maybe they have like a beach house, but who knows? Maybe they're under a bridge. It's like this whole arrangement sounds strange.
Yeah. I felt like Ethan Hawke's character was a little underutilized. Like, I really wanted this movie to do more at probing how Ted Danson felt about fatherhood now that he was like revitalizing his relationship with his own father. We do get that, but it's kind of crammed towards the end and a little bit rushed. I kind of wanted a little more conflict on that throughout the film, but mostly Ethan Hawke shows up for 45 seconds and then disappears for another 10 minutes. One thing this did make me think of, I mentioned the pierced ear. So my dad, he had certain things that he like felt particular about. I think everybody does. Dads in particular, they have certain things they feel particular about. One was he didn't like earrings. He didn't like long hair. He didn't like stuff like that. Part of the reason he didn't want me to have Tommy as my favorite Power Ranger, Brian, because he had long hair. I had to be a Jason guy. But one time my brother Will, who spent 6 years in Japan, came home and didn't tell my dad in advance that he had gotten both of his ears pierced. And so my dad got really mad at him because he showed up at the airport with both of his ears pierced, which was one of the things that my dad didn't like. So I was thinking of that too. But I don't think Ted Danson complains about the pierced ear. I think he even says it looks good. They like talk, "Oh yeah, you look kind of cool with that, Ethan Hawke." It's like, I don't know. I felt like this movie did a lot to undercut its conflict as it went along.
I agree. There is some comment that's repeated. I forget exactly what triggers it, but the dad, Jack Lemmon, says it to Ted Danson, and then later Ted Danson says it to Ethan Hawke of, "The world has changed. You won't believe how the world has changed." What was it that they said that about? I'm trying to remember.
I don't remember either. What made the world change, Brian? I don't know.
We'll have to go back to the tape. We'll get back to you next week, tell you how the world changed.
That's another thing about dads is like they fall into routines and they see the world a certain way, you know? Stereotypically, every dad is different. I want to be the dad that changes with the times, Brian, but not too much so that I'm corny. You know, I got to strike the right balance. I guess that's what every dad wants to do.
They changed what it was. Now what I'm with isn't it. And what is it is...
Strange and scary. Is that what it is? Yeah.
It'll happen to you.
Great monologue. Up there in the Simpsons annals, as far as I'm concerned. In terms of like how universal it is, you know?
I don't want anything up my annals.
All right, so then the mom gets home from the hospital. The dad is still kind of doing pretty well. The mom gets a little grumpy because she's like, you did things differently. I told you I had everything in the freezer. How come you're making this meal instead? That type of stuff.
I really didn't like the mom. I'm going to say it now. They made her a difficult character to like, possibly intentionally designed to dislike. She's a tyrant, and if there's an arc, it's that Danson is like breaking his dad away from this Ice Queen dominatrix.
I agree. I was sympathetic with her up until the second half of the film. I was like, I kind of get why, okay, you have spent years and years with this guy, taking care of him, keeping the house on track. You get sick, and then people come in and change the way that things get done. Like that, I'm kind of sympathetic with being grumpy about. But then she never gets ungrumpy. That's like she needed to have her own awakening to this as well, and she never does. But then the Jack Lemmon, one day he's this is okay. I'll finish the thought. Jack Lemmon one day he's like, "Hey, can you come here and take a look at this, Ted Danson?" Have I even said what Ted Danson's character's name is? I don't know. I just thought of him as Ted Danson. Let's say what their names are. All right, let's look this up.
Aren't they John and Jake?
We have so Jack is Jake. Jack Lemmon is Jake. Ted is John. Jake, John, and then Ethan Hawke is Billy. Kevin Spacey is Mario. Olympia Dukakis is Betty Tremont. Betty.
Betty, that's her name as Tommy Wiseau would say.
I guess Annie's the sister. All right, so yeah, come look at this with me. And they go and they look in the toilet, and there's blood in the toilet, Brian. And
bloody piss.
Yeah, this was kind of gross. Like, I'm not sure we needed to see it. I guess it gets the point across. This is another thing with Nothing in Common that it made me think of is like in Nothing in Common at one point. I hope it wasn't his real feet, but maybe it was. At one point, they zoom in on Jackie Gleason's feet, and they're like gross feet. They got like bumps and yellow toes and cracks, and it's like the worst feet you've ever seen. It's like, I don't want to see infected feet in the middle of my Tom Hanks dramedy. I don't want to see that. This isn't like a film where I want to be seeing disgusting stuff. I just want to see fathers and sons. I want to see old people and young people bonding and learning that they're not so different. We don't need to see gross feet to process that.
Okay, devil's advocate. I don't want to see Jackie Gleason's feet either. But I think both of these films very much deal with the idea that old age is something that's going to happen to most people. And the young people in their lives are going to run into that and face that. Like, it's kind of the point, I think.
So you're saying that, like, facing some of these unpleasant physical realities head on, forcing both the characters and the viewers.
Like, I think that's the reason that the movie gets made. Like, why make a movie that is about a dad being old? It's because it's a common human experience.
Sure. You're probably right. Doesn't make me excited to see bloody pee or gross feet, but you're probably right. And it's to be fair, it does kind of prime you for some of the physical unpleasantness that's going to take place in the middle act of this film, because they go to this doctor's office and it becomes clear pretty quickly that the dad has cancer. And Ted Danson's like, don't tell him he has cancer. Don't say cancer. He had a brother who died of cancer. And if he hears the word cancer, he's going to freak out. He's doing well right now, overall, psychologically. Don't say cancer. Ted Danson takes 10 steps away. The doctor comes over and says, well, guess what? You got cancer. And then, like, everything just breaks for Jake. He goes into, like, this catatonic state, like this state of shock.
Yeah, he goes, like, cartoon crazy, just gibbering mess.
Yeah, and it's very tough to watch. It's probably well acted. I mean, I've been in a small handful of situations where I've seen people in a state of shock and incapacitated, and this uncomfortably reminded me of this. And it gets worse because, like, Ted Danson determines the doctor isn't doing a good job caring for the dad, isn't being comforting enough, nurturing enough. And he's like, all right, I'm busting him out of the hospital. We're taking him home. And, like, cradling him and, like, carrying him to the bed. And, like, the dad is, like, his hands are shaking and he, like, can barely chew his food. And it's like a sharp U-turn on where the dad was. I almost didn't even believe that the dad went from, like, this vivacious to this catatonic, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes that's the way health goes, you know? And we have, like, this scene that just goes on and on. Like, it's probably only, like, 2 or 3 minutes, but it felt like it just took forever, where Ted Danson is trying to get Jack Lemmon to, like, eat a sandwich for dinner and then lie down for bed and just be his normal self, even though he's, like, clearly struggling to do basic things like this. And then, like, he loses the dad and he's, like, running around the house. Where is he? And he's, like, quivering under the bed. And this was really tough for me to watch. I don't know about you, Brian.
Yeah. It was messy. And just another example of what I think the movie was trying to do, which is really, like, rub your face in people get old and their bodies break down and their minds slip away. One idea, this thought that he can do this better, not just better than the mom, but better than the doctors. Like, Ted Danson is the person to save his dad. I grappled with that a bit. Like, I wonder, he kind of has this savior complex, and, like, how true to life is that? But there might be something to it, because for doctors, it's their job, right? Helping people is their job. And I think you're always going to put a little more into caring about your family than caring about your work. Like, I think that's just a truth at like the personal individual level. That's where your loyalties lie. So there could be something to that. But, you know, doctors have training. Doctors have experience with lots of different people going through medical conditions.
Yes, I agree with all of that. I thought this movie handled it pretty well. So first of all, I think people have the mindset that Ted Danson has here, where, like, they feel like hospitals and doctors aren't doing enough for their loved ones. And it kind of, you're right, savior complex might be a good word. It kind of triggers this reflex in your brain where it's like, you're not caring enough. I need to be the one to care. I will throw myself at this. Like, I kind of feel like that's not an uncommon thing. And I think the movie does a decent job of showing, like, at first, it really seems like it goes badly. Like, it doesn't, like, the first couple scenes, you don't get the sense that he's doing any better with Ted Danson than he would have if he had just stayed at the hospital. It does turn around eventually, but I don't know. I think you're right. I think it is interesting. And I think it ultimately paints Ted Danson in a heroic light. This film does, like, the actions that he's taking, like, he's right to be skeptical of the doctors. But I think it's complicated for sure, because, yeah, you're right. Like, There's a ridiculous amount of doctors doing bad jobs out there. Everybody in the world needs medical care at some point in their life. And so there's a lot of doctors out there. And I don't know, you've worked with people, Brian. Is it not your experience that some people are good at their job and some people are less good at their job?
Well said.
So this gets us to about somewhere between the half and the 2/3 mark.
I'm going to butt in and just say, if you like listening to podcasts, which listening to our show, you might, a podcast that I have followed is called Dr. Death, and each season is about a malpractice case. Really crazy stories on that show. I recommend it. They've done like 5 seasons.
Oh, interesting. So this gets us about to the 2/3 point. And as this is kind of going, there's this whole thing where Ted Danson is at the hospital trying to find the right doctor. And they end up getting this black African doctor who is a much better fit and has a better attitude with the dad. And eventually, a combination of Ted Danson kind of always being there, caring for, giving like warmth and comfort to the dad, as well as this new doctor figuring out like what the root medical cause was. They figure out whatever it is. They kind of hand wave it with a little bit of lingo. It's like, oh, we had to get his brain enzymes right or something. Like on a dime, he snaps out of his catatonic state into being awake and alert. And this was like a little too much herky jerk health changes for me. He went from being like a kind of reasonably energetic old man to non-functional as a person to now, okay, he's super energetic. He's real perky because now he's like 100 back to being 100%. And he's like going golfing and tap dancing and stuff, you know?
Yeah, it's almost like a changeling. Like his soul got swapped. Like, you know, he was out of his body and now suddenly some new incubus is in there. Because, yeah, he's like super sexually charged. He's wearing different clothes. It's a whole different energy.
I think the signature line of the film is something along the lines of dying isn't a sin, but not living is a sin, or something like that. So he's kind of embraced this new YOLO bucket list mindset. Oh, I'm going to learn Japanese. Every night of the week, we're going to go meet a new neighbor. We're going to try foreign foods. We're going to go traveling, you and me, wife.
And the wife hates it.
Oh, so much. This is where she becomes unlikable.
It made me hate her. It's like, this is really terrible. Like, he's happy. We can see it. And she really just doesn't want anything to change.
Yeah. Yeah, it was kind of miserable for her. She's like, I want my husband back. I was like, your husband is happier and more active and doing stuff. You don't want to do stuff with your husband?
I think she literally says, I don't want to meet children. Which maybe there's something to that, I guess, but very icy.
Some children are annoying, to be fair. And this is also where he's the most Jack Lemon-y. If you didn't know that he was Jack Lemmon up until the 2/3 mark, he does a little bit of his Jack Lemmon shtick of like his voice, and is like, oh, can't even really imitate it. But I definitely recognized him more in this last bit. It's like colored with this kind of weird saga of like, oh, he thinks he lives on a farm in a different life.
I almost thought you weren't going to bring it up, because throughout the movie there are these, what I assumed were flashbacks. And I thought it was flashbacks that Ted Danson was having of the life that he had with his family when he was younger. Then later on, the dad is like talking about the stuff in the flashbacks, and you think, oh, well, it's the dad having the flashbacks. But what is the resolution to it, Dan? Like, what do they mean? What are they actually?
It's that he's like, because he's repressed his life so much, the only way he can cope with it is like having this delusional other life where he's like a stoic, strong guy living on a farm. And I didn't even really understand it because it didn't even really seem in line with his "I'm living the moment" thing.
Right, and he has extra kids in these weird, not real side flashes. He has 4 kids instead of 2. So I was confused.
Yeah, and he's like, "I'm gonna go outside and I'm gonna hoe the garden or something," and it's like, "Oh, we have to humor him. We have to let him think that he actually works on this farm and has this life that he doesn't have." But then he's also like wanting to do these other life experiences that are kind of real. Like, that is the thing that people want to do. Oh, I want to go and I want to eat more foreign food. I want to be more adventurous with my palate and stuff. So I don't know. It felt kind of incompatible. This whole final act is very strange because he goes from being on death's door apparently to like now he can like run a mile, and he's like living life to the fullest here. And then it's got this other weird second life hallucination thing that just it didn't quite all fit for me, I gotta say.
Yeah, and the doctor just kind of says, "Oh, he's a functioning schizophrenic." That's kind of a big thing to introduce all of a sudden.
Whoa. Yeah. But then it also tries to tie that with like living a repressed life too. It's kind of weird thematic turn, I guess.
Right. The idea that he's kind of turned inward and made this imagined life for himself. It's almost like he, authors, I feel like, do this. Make up fictional worlds that they can decide to be in for a while.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Almost as like coping with the fact that they live pretty boring lives, But have you ever seen the movie Romancing the Stone?
Yes.
I felt like it didn't fully live up to its premise, but the idea there is like a romance adventure novelist basically has to live out one of her stories, which it's kind of a knockoff Indiana Jones in execution, but I thought that one was kind of fun. I think that's Zemeckis.
Yeah, I think if Tom Selleck had ended up playing Indiana Jones like he was originally supposed to, I think Indiana Jones would have been like locked in the 80s. And it would have been, we would have thought, oh yeah, that's pretty much like Romancing the Stone.
Yeah, yeah. Another interesting one, since you brought up authors and like them processing real life through their writing and creating these worlds through their writing is, did you end up catching this past year's Argylle?
No, haven't seen that one.
Okay, so it's such a strange movie. I actually liked it more than most people did. It got really panned. But the premise is that this author who writes these spy novels about Agent Argylle, it turns out that like she's writing true spy conspiracies. And so she gets abducted because she has like the knowledge of what the spy conspiracies are. And it's got a couple of twists in there. It kind of leans into the premise a little bit more than Romancing the Stone does, with like twists and characters and stuff, and it's an interesting one. But yes, eventually in the last 20 minutes we learned that the cancer has come back, so now we're doing another U-turn on the health, and we get a couple of sentimental scenes of getting your last chance to say goodbye to your dad and all that. And one thing I really did like from this later stretch of the film is that Ted Danson really patches things up with Ethan Hawke, and not too cheaply either. It's like, he's like, well, we got to have these tough conversations. Like, because one thing I didn't say is Ted Danson is apparently divorced from Ethan Hawke's mom. So like, he's like, well, how are we going to, I don't know. I felt like it did a good job of broaching, how are we going to have this complicated father-son relationship? Like, because he's now seen how valuable it is to have that in your life, in his new relationship with Jack Lemmon, now that he's spending time back at home with his dad. So I thought that was kind of touching, and the father-son thing kind of came full circle here with Ethan Hawke in a way that it didn't in the first 2/3 of the film.
I agree. I thought it came together at the end. I'm interested to see where we land when we get to Is It Good? Because people seemed very down on this movie in Letterboxd reviews. and I left it with a generally positive feeling.
Mm-hmm.
But as we're talking about it, it's like it is kind of a weird roller coaster. Like from moment to moment, like it's almost like they built a building with no blueprint or something.
Well, and I think that speaks to it being made by a TV director, TV writer, because it feels a little episodic. It feels a little slice of life in a way that a sitcom director would think about stories, you know? Although he's like, well, it's not a sitcom, so it's actually got to have things change from segment to segment. So it does have that different from a sitcom. But the movie does end with Jack Lemmon passing away, and this strange beat that was still kind of sweet of where like Ted Danson and Ethan Hawke dress up in a silly outfit and like dedicate a flower to Jack Lemmon. It was, I guess, in reference to the fact that in his last bit of life, Jack Lemmon was doing things more adventurously and dressing in new outfits and stuff. But I didn't quite get it, but it was at least sweet. And the movie ends with Jack Lemmon's funeral. And I don't know. Some things had arcs. Some things didn't have arcs. Some parts of it worked. Some parts of it were a little head scratching, but it's kind of one of these 80s dramedies that I'm glad they exist, even when they're imperfect. Any other dad thoughts before we move in an even darker direction, Brian?
Just that it captured, it's like it gave you what it promised, that he gets old, they have good times, they have bad times, they have like rebounds, but eventually everybody dies.
Yeah, you got to end with death. Well, you don't got to end it with death, but I felt confident that this one was, I don't know why I felt confident this one was going to, but I just felt like it was going to. It kind of does the thing where it teases at the beginning, oh, is it the mom who's going to die? You know? I tend to not like it when stories do this, but for whatever reason, I caught on this one's radar right away. It was like, it's going to be about the dad, not the mom, and the dad's going to die at the end. And that's exactly what happened.
Well, the title of the film is Dad, so that was a good clue.
You think that was the giveaway? You think that was what tipped it for me? How did I figure it out?
You mentioned Bucket List. Have you seen Bucket List?
No.
So in that one, it's two old guys. I think it's Morgan Freeman and Jack Nicholson.
Oh, let me guess. It does the thing where you think one of the guys is going to die and then the other guy dies.
You got it. Yes.
I hate it when movies and stories do this.
Like Fault in Our Stars.
I was just going to say Fault in Our Stars. Another one is, this is not exactly the same thing, but like the same structure. I never liked it in, what's the Pixar one where they go to the land of the dead?
Coco?
Yeah. So it's like, I'm going to go hunt down my dad. And he's like, oh, that guy's my dad. And then we spend the whole movie being like, that guy's my dad. Person A is my dad. And he's like, hey, person B, come help me figure out how person A is my dad. And person B is just like a random person. I mean, it's not a random person, but he's another character. And then it's like, oh, wait, no, it turns out this whole time person B was your dad. I don't know. It's like, I feel like if you build to an arc being about one person and then you abruptly left turn it to being about someone else, it requires a very deft touch to make that kind of story work.
Right. The trend in Disney fake out villains has launched 1,000 video essays. There are things that I like about Coco specifically, and things about that twist that I didn't love. The biggest thing for me is that he has this torn photograph that the head is ripped off the dad, it's like the great-grandfather, like the patriarch of the clan, and he assumes it's this famous guy, this like mariachi Elvis dude, and so he's trying to track down that guy, and instead on the journey he ropes in the assistance of Skeleton Shaggy, this like skinny yokel dude. Help me find Elvis. And then he finds the other part of the photograph. It's like, oh, it was you, Skeleton Shaggy. But the body is not the same. He's wearing like shoulder pads.
Oh.
The Elvis dude has this huge torso, and then it's this skinny guy that he puts the pieces together of.
So not only did you have mixed thoughts about the twist itself, you felt like the key piece of evidence wasn't there. Didn't support it.
Right, the clue does not match. This is clearly manufactured evidence.
Yeah.
It's like the frog thing in Jurassic Park. Like, you just put this in there to make your twist work. And even then, it's like, I don't know.
Well, no, but the stupid thing about Jurassic Park is like the frog has nothing to do with the dangers. Even like, oh, they bred in captivity. Apparently that matters in the second one. I haven't seen Jurassic Park, any Jurassic Parks except the first one. But like that movie's about someone de-electrified the fence because they didn't want to pay the salary for Newman. It's like, that's the whole thing. The raptors, the T-Rex. It's because they de-electrified the fences. Didn't build it with proper slope so that it was easy for them to escape the bunker.
That's right. That's the big one.
But no, I completely agree with you. It's like, why did you choose that exact frog to be the DNA source? You could have chosen all of lizards and amphibians. You chose the one that happens to be able to mutate its sex for the purpose of a twist. But yeah, we're getting a little off topic here. My last thought on Dad. I like it when comedians get old and start doing dramatic roles. And I want more comedians who maybe aren't being cast for being the young funny guy anymore to do dramatic roles. And I know this happens, but I always like it. So, you know, Steve Carell, Will Ferrell, all you guys who are in your 50s now, start getting ready to do movies like this, because I'll tune in.
Yeah, I would check that out.
All right, so The Father came out in 2020. We're going from dad to father here. This film, I would not call it a dramedy. I would barely call Dad a dramedy. It's but definitely more drama than comedy.
Right. It's a case where I was reading about it on Wikipedia, and I think it called it a comedy film. And it's like, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Not really.
It's borderline at best. There's some funny stuff. I think it's particularly the last act when Jack Lemmon does a dance holding a golf club, and I don't know, just like gets to be a little silly. There's an air of comedy, if not actual jokes. No such airs in The Father. So this one has even less of a story than Dad, which I felt was kind of story light and vibes heavy. But this one it's for a different reason, because this one's all about not the story itself, but experiencing the storytelling of it. So The Father is told from the perspective mainly of the father. So it's a little different from Dad. Dad is told from the perspective of Ted Danson, who is the son of the elderly father. He's the middle of three generations. Here in The Father, we don't have three generations. We just have the child and the father. In this case, the child is mainly played by Olivia Colman. So what we have is, as our two main actors are Olivia Colman and Anthony Hopkins. So those are the two leads. I mean, Anthony Hopkins, of course, just all-time great actor. What's the first Anthony Hopkins role you think of, Brian? I think I know the answer, but what is it?
Hannibal Lecter.
That's what most people is.
But he does a lot of stuff, though.
He's really active, yeah. I just pulled it up on Letterboxd. If you want to look at films starring Anthony Hopkins, there's 173 movies. Now, probably some of those are probably cameos or documentaries or whatever, but like you scroll through it and most of them are like real movies. And I've probably seen him in like, okay, what does this say? I've seen him in 6 movies I've logged with him in it. So not that many, but like, and he doesn't just do like art stuff. He does genre stuff. Oh, wait. He's in Beowulf.
Yep. He was Hrothgar.
That's right. I forgot. I never remember who the actors are in that, like we talked about, because you don't see them, you know. Other than Angelina Jolie, they don't really distinctly resemble them. I guess what we said Brendan Gleeson does too, but
yeah. So we talked about that recently. Probably my favorite Anthony Hopkins movie, aside from Silence of the Lambs, is The Mask of Zorro. Have you seen that one, Dan?
That is the one, the first one with Banderas and Zeta Jones.
It's the 90s Zorro movie, the first one.
So I did see that as a kid, but I haven't seen it since, and I would definitely watch it again.
Yeah, maybe we'll get that on the pod at some point, because I I just think it's a good example of what it is. Just, a period action adventure, good for all ages, 90s blockbuster. But Anthony Hopkins plays the old Zorro, like the Zorro that we know, Diego de la Vega, like the classic pulp novel Zorro, and then Batman Beyond style. It's a little later in the history, and he's teaching young rapscallion, like brigand Antonio Banderas to take up the mantle and be this new Zorro that the people need. But Anthony Hopkins is like the old gentleman. I think it's well done. We'll have to talk that movie at some point.
Yeah. He has 6 Academy Award nominations and 2 wins, including this one and Silence of the Lambs. I really like the book, The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. Probably, honestly, in my top 10 favorite novels. I need to revisit it. I only read it once, but he's in that and he got nominated for that. And I really want to see that at some point. But and I think if you look at the years he got the Oscars, it was like every other year for a decade. He got 1992, 1994, 1996, and 1998. He had Oscar nominations. Oh, he was in Amistad too? Didn't you like that one?
I did. I did like a mini binge of Spielberg, watching Spielberg movies that I hadn't seen yet. I still have more to go. One that I liked was Amistad. Anthony Hopkins played John Quincy Adams, the 6th president of the United States.
He was also nominated for playing Nixon 2 years earlier. Wow.
Whoa.
He's been nominated as 2 different presidents then. There you go. What a time to be alive. We have someone nominated for playing a president in this year's Oscars too, Brian.
That's right. There was some Trump docudrama or something, right? It's called The Apprentice.
The Apprentice, Sebastian Stan playing a younger Donald Trump. I really don't know that much about it. I've heard it's ambivalent.
I think it's about him kind of being mentored by Roy Cohn, the lawyer guy.
Okay. Not too many people out there who are ambivalent about Donald Trump, so I'm not sure what the audience is for an ambivalent Donald Trump biopic, but yeah. But anyways, on to The Father. Olivia Colman is a great actress too. Like genuinely, in my opinion, one of our great active actors right now. She's been in a couple of movies where she's been nominated for awards, but she's also a very prolific TV actor. She was in, I think, The Queen, where she has been like really acclaimed. And then she was also in this show, this comedy called Fleabag, where she's just totally transformed and is like a terrific comic actress in that. And she plays like kind of I think she's the stepmom or the mom or something like that. And she's kind of miserable to be around. And I just think she's an absolutely outstanding actress in everything that I've seen her in, even stuff I don't like. I'm like, well, at least Olivia Colman was in it and made it better, you know? So I don't know. Maybe I just like British actors, Brian. Is that what it is?
Who knows? So Anthony Hopkins, I guess, is Welsh.
Okay.
Which is part of the United Kingdom. But I don't really think of him as having an accent. I don't know. He doesn't sound British to me. I'm not sure how I would characterize his accent. Obviously, everybody's got an accent. But Olivia Colman sounds really British. They sounded very different to me.
Interesting. So she's the daughter. I always think she looks a little older than she is. In real life, she's barely 50, I think. But she definitely looks like she could be in her 50s. So the premise is basically that we're seeing this through Anthony Hopkins' eyes. So I actually do think of him, maybe not as British, but having a sort of like haughtiness about him. Just his air. That I think, maybe haughtiness isn't the right word. Whatever it is that makes him work as Hannibal Lecter. Like this sort of, maybe not nobility, but...
he's like genteel. He's urbane.
Yes. And I think that richly deepens his character in The Father. That demeanor, because it's almost like a defensive mechanism. So I should just say what it is. It's that he has Alzheimer's or dementia, and it's told from his perspective. And I've never seen a movie do this before, because like, okay, that sounds like your very basic Oscar bait, like feel sad about somebody caring for this disabled person. But it's like shot and told like a horror movie almost. It's because it's like, maybe that's overselling it a little bit, but you are in the head of Anthony Hopkins. And so you see weird jumps in time, weird like faces shifting around and forgotten details and not being clear where one person is in relationship to another person and like where even we are in time and stuff. And it's very disorienting.
Yeah, so things change. He'll walk from room to room and things will change around him. It won't be the way that it was before, including that actors will swap. So suddenly it'll literally be a different person. And they're always like bringing things up, but whatever they said now is different from what they said the last time. And they're like, "No, Dad, remember I said this."
Right. So it's like, oh, you've got a new nurse helping you tomorrow. No, Dad, it's this other nurse that you're talking about. And then he's very confused by it.
It had me thinking of, there's a sketch on Monty Python's Flying Circus where I think somebody takes their cat to the vet and the diagnosis is the cat is bored. And the way that the cat must be treated is it needs to get confused. And so they do like a lot of random things so that the cat will be confused. And that's like the successful treatment.
I don't quite understand what the connection is there, Brian. That they has to do random things.
Yeah, it's confusion. It's what he needs is to be confused.
Okay.
And so that's what is happening here is Anthony Hopkins is getting confused.
But it's got this just deeply tragic air about it because particularly from Olivia Colman's character, you can just see her struggling so hard to like get her dad pinned down to reality. And because we're seeing it from the dad's perspective and we're like helpless, it's like normally when you're in the audience's perspective, you're like in the shoes of the sympathetic person, you know? And so like you kind of see it from their perspective, but here we kind of have it a blend of the two because we kind of understand what's happening from the daughter's perspective, but we're experiencing reality through the eyes of the Anthony Hopkins character. And so when he forgets something, it's like I was thinking a lot of Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. One thing I like about that movie a lot is it really sells the idea that your memory is your identity. Like it really makes you understand that. And so like destroying memories, removing memories from your brain is like apocalyptic. It's like the end of you as a person in some ways. You're taking away these things that make you the basic version of yourself because you ground everything you do. It's like almost so basic you can't even describe it in like what you remember about what you've done and the things that you've learned and how like what you're doing relates to what's going on in your life and stuff. And so like I felt like the father does a good job of like really unmooring you from reality and showing how that like just kind of breaks down your basic personhood in tragic ways. I don't know.
Yeah, it would really suck. I don't want to be in this situation. I was wondering, Dan, have your grandparents experienced dementia or people in your life?
Not to this level, and to the extent that it happened at all, it was rather shielded from me. I haven't really dealt closely with someone who's suffered from dementia, but what about you, Brian?
Well, not super closely, but my grandmother, who lived into her 90s, did have dementia. And so I could see that, it affected my dad to, in some cases be forgotten, basically, not be recognized any longer.
It's crazy to think about. It's like someone that, particularly a parent to a child, it's like it was one of the main cores of your life was raising someone and building them up as a person, and now you don't even recognize them. I mean, it really is. It's hard to talk about, hard to think about, and I think not uncommon for this to manifest paranoia in people when they can't trust their memory. I think that's a common symptom, and we see some of that here. Is that Anthony Hopkins' character? Not only does he not really know what's going on, but like one of the ways he verbalizes that is like in his sort of kind of overconfident, genteel, stoic needs to be cunning, and oh, this person here is trying to trick me. They're trying to steal my watch. The two motifs that occur again and again in this film are his watch and the chicken. Everybody's always making chicken. That's what's for dinner, like 8 scenes in a row. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. Another motif is the house that they're in and who owns the house. So that's like another way that he gets paranoid. He gets paranoid. Somebody's going to steal my watch. But another one is at one point he like goes on a rant that he thinks that his daughter is trying to steal his house when like it's like the opposite. Like she's going out of her way to be comforting and caring. So it's hard to hear him say those things. And
also I think he's living in her apartment, actually, is the way that it turns out. But the way the presentation is so fractured, it's like a dream. You can't even really lock down what's real.
Right.
But couple comments on what you said. So it's definitely British, and everybody says flat. They say flat all the time. It's not an apartment, it's a flat. And for whatever reason, that's one of those Britishisms that bugs me a little bit, because it just sounds so inconsequential to me. Like a flat, it just sounds like a throwaway word. And so when he's like ranting about, it's my flat, it's my flat, it's like, that's too much weight to put on that word.
This has been a thing for you recently, Brian. Specific words, you don't like it when people get excited about that word.
It's like, yeah, certain words can only bear so much weight. But the other thing, though, is the watch. And at first, I was a little annoyed that came up so many times. The watch, losing my watch, she's stealing my watch. But then what I came to as a conclusion on that is that it's a symbol for losing track of time.
Yeah, great point. I didn't even think about it that way, but you're absolutely right. And he uses it to ask what the time is. He's like, he's not sure what the time is all the time. Did I just wake up? Why am I in my pajamas? Am I about to go to bed? But I think this is also another thing that it's kind of like a little detail that symbolizes it even beyond the time theme, which I think you're spot on with there, of like, and I suspect this is kind of a real thing that happens, is like people have almost tics, like certain things that because their memory is not quite right, they kind of latch onto those things. And so I think that for him, it's this watch. It's like, where did he put his watch? Oh, he has this one spot he always goes and puts it. Well, he's like almost on a loop, like putting his watch away and then going and finding where he put the watch, you know? And every single day he's asking, where's my watch, you know? And it just becomes like a little microcosm of the havoc that this wreaks on his life, on his ability to function.
Couple other random things. So one of the features that changes a lot is whether Olivia Colman is in a relationship and who she is in a relationship with. So sometimes she's like divorced. Other times she's just started dating somebody. But most of the time she's married to some guy, or, you know, long-term relationship with some guy. But who the guy is can swap around. And two things. A lot of the time he's called Paul, and that's another Britishism. They say, oh, he's called Paul, or he's called James. And what I have said to Dan is, well, why is he called that? What's his name? Like in America, if you're called something, it's like a nickname. It's some other layer, whereas a name is like more foundational. To be named Paul, to be named James. Rather than just to be called. But, you know, names are in their own way arbitrary. They only mean something because we say they do.
There's a lot of strange stuff going on with the continuity here. Yeah, so there's the two actors. There was times when it was not clear to me, was he even... It was almost like he was remembering something from the future and like living through something in the past. I didn't quite understand how that would be possible. Like, I kind of understand if like there would be big forward gaps in time, but like kind of jumping around in time, like maybe you would remember it as such, and maybe that's what it's conveying. But like when he would be like, oh no, you're going to move to Paris, right? And she's like, no, I've never talked about moving to Paris. Like when we've seen her talking about moving to Paris, I didn't know always if like we were supposed to be in the past and that hasn't happened yet, or if he was just completely misremembering and we weren't supposed to take anything as like having actually happened. Do you know what I'm talking about here, Brian?
Yeah, it was definitely confusing. And so by the end, I had kind of given up being able to concretely say that any of these details were real and what was actually going on. But I think that's kind of the point, that you want to feel like you're slipping. One of the guys is the actor is named Rufus Sewell, and he is the Ubersturmbannführer in Man in the High Castle on like Prime Video or whatever. He's the high-ranking Nazi dude in the alternate history show. He's had some other big parts lately, but I feel like that's the one where he's like the lead of the show.
He's the more handsome one, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Like a chiseled look.
And the other husband is, I recognize this guy. His name is Mark Geddes. I'm probably saying that wrong. But I've seen him in one or two things before. But he's got kind of like more of a receding hairline and kind of a slightly schlubbier look about him. But then there's kind of a couple of things that we can certainly take as real. So one is that I think you hit a couple of the important ones, which is that Olivia Colman has one either husband or long-term boyfriend, I think husband, breaks up with him. And we gather that in part of it is because of the strain that the father puts on the relationship. And then she gets in another relationship later. Another is that there's another daughter, but this daughter has passed away in an accident. And like one thing that seems to break people over and over again is when he can't remember that. And he's like, well, where is she? Oh, this person makes me think of her. And then in one moment, he like walks through this door that we've seen a few times, and he walks through it, and he's in a hospital, and he walks down the hall, and he sees like a bloody person in a hospital bed, which I think we take to be the daughter. She probably died in some car accident or something. I don't know. So that's like another, I think, thing we can concretely say. And then there's the overarching arc of, well, where is the father going to live? Who's going to look after him? And should he just go to a nursing home? And Olivia Colman throughout all of it is resistant to the idea of the nursing home, in part because he doesn't want to leave, but he doesn't even know where he is. I think the house they're in changes, or sorry, the flat that they're in changes, not just before the ending, because in the very ending, which I guess I'll say now, it's a strange ending. He wakes up and he's in a nursing home. So he did finally move to a nursing home, and we learned that Olivia Colman has indeed moved to Paris and only comes and visits sometime. And two of the nurses are the same actors who have played like other characters, including one of the husbands or one of the boyfriends, except apparently he's also a nurse, right, Brian? Was I going crazy, or was it the same actor?
Yeah. So these characters who have been swapped in as the boyfriend and sometimes the daughter, they have like alternate actors, and those two are both nurses at this home that he's at the end.
And that actress, by the way, is Olivia Williams, who is in Rushmore, which is a classic Wes Anderson. And then Anthony Hopkins kind of has this breakdown where he says, I'm losing my leaves, the branches, the wind and the rain. And it's this, he wants his mommy. And it's like, I've said this already a couple times. It's tough to watch him have this last breakdown because, you know, he's like the old dignified man and he's calling for his mommy, you know?
Right. And I've heard about cases where that happens. Like when your faculties go, that's what you call for. I don't know. I don't know if that's what I'd call for. I could see myself crying. I don't know if I would call for that.
Yeah.
Maybe. But it made me want to give him the Oscar. It's like, please feel better, Anthony Hopkins. Have the Oscar.
I know. Bold take. The best Anthony Hopkins has been in any movie I've seen. I mean, I know he's iconic as Hannibal Lecter, but like just in terms of doing everything to bring a movie to the next level, I mean, he's so good in this. And honestly, Olivia Colman is great too.
Did you know Silence of the Lambs, though, is the shortest screen time of any Best Actor winner? He's only in the movie on screen for like 16 minutes total.
He really should have been Best Supporting in that case, right?
Probably.
And Kieran Culkin might win Best Supporting Actor this year for A Real Pain, which is a Jesse Eisenberg movie. And he's the lead of that movie. Or he's at worst co-lead. Like, he should not be supporting actor. He's there in almost the entire movie.
Oh, wow.
There's a lot of category fraud that goes on. One reason I admire Amadeus is they're like, you know what? They're both leads. Just go for it. Sure. You know, only one of them can win, but who cares? They're both leads, and I admire that.
Right. Man, Amadeus. Maybe, well, we're coming up on episode 200. I think we've come up with something good for it, but at some point we got to do an Amadeus episode.
Yeah, that would be good. Any other thoughts on The Father? 2020 film. Oh, one last thing. This came out in 2020. It was made before COVID, but I don't know. I think it might have gone to streaming directly, been one of those premium streaming things, or I'm not really sure if it was ever released to theaters properly. It's also kind of a COVID movie because it's about being trapped in a place. He's trapped in this place.
Yes. So I'm glad that you brought that up. I could tell from the jump that this was a movie based on a play. Another one in that vein that I just watched, The Whale with Brendan Fraser. Both about a guy being trapped in a room and you can't really go anywhere. And that's because a play, you can't really go anywhere. One of the great powers of a movie is that it can vicariously take you somewhere. So a lot of movies, you're going to be in different places. But if you start by adapting a play, you're kind of limiting yourself. And sometimes that can really, really work well. Like, I think of 12 Angry Men.
Mm-hmm.
Probably my favorite movie based on a play. And it's a chamber drama. It's the deliberations of a jury in a jury room. And here I think it works well. I wasn't as enamored with The Whale. But I just think that when you do that, you run the risk of being trapped. But here it's like thematically valuable.
Right. And I think an important thing that it does is it's not just in a room, but it does some very clever things with editing and transporting between spaces in non-physical ways, non-linear physical ways. And I thought it was very effective with its use of contained space.
Mm-hmm. One other thought on this topic is I mentioned movies give you a vicarious experience, and in some places it's seeing something you wouldn't normally see, going somewhere you wouldn't normally go. But as I mentioned with Dad, both of these movies let you kind of have a dry run of experiencing this traumatic thing that a lot of us are going to have to go through of caring for an elderly parent.
Mm-hmm.
A parent who is, going through decrepitude.
So one thing that both of these movies kind of leave more as subtext is rather than actual text, or at least not central text of the film, is how hard it is to see your dad, who was like the strongest person, the person on whom you could rely as a pillar, being in this weakened state. Like, it definitely exists in both these movies, but I didn't feel like there was too much reflection on, I see my dad as a strong and infallible person because he was my dad. At least it doesn't directly comment on that. And that's part of the reason that I actually like Hopkins' performance a lot, is because I feel as if the way that he carries himself and the way that Olivia Colman reacts to him, you do get that sense, that you get the sense that he was a very strong, sharp person who was like a great contributor to society, maybe, or at least like someone with whom you would like really look up to. And that makes his degraded state like kind of all the harder to process, you know? But anyways, Brian, we made it through 2 films about fatherhood. And again, I chose them because of their names, because they were dad and father. You got to go direct, you know? But I think they did have a synergy to them. Similar themes about, as you said, witnessing our parents enter that state.
Yeah, they ended up having a lot in common.
And that's something that, like you said, it's inevitable, you know? I don't know. Last thing that I'll say here on the personal front, I guess, is that it's, to me, almost like a blessing in disguise. Well, not a blessing in disguise. I don't know what the right phrase is. Maybe not even silver lining, but like, I guess a flip side to a sudden, unexpected death with no suffering. Well, I didn't have time to emotionally prepare for my father leaving, you know, for him dying. It just happened, and I wasn't ready for it. But the flip side of that is he got to leave without suffering, surrounded by family, and I don't have to witness him go through any of this, you know? And so I don't know. It's like, I'm not saying that I wouldn't have it the other way, but like, it's a dark side to human existence, you know? It's inevitable. Either you go suddenly and you're not ready for it, or it's a long path there and it's a painful path there, you know? It's going to be one or the other. And both of these are about the long, painful path, Brian.
Right. I was thinking about that as well while I was watching.
So anyways, any other dad thoughts, father thoughts before we get to rating, or are you ready to go?
We'll definitely have lots of dad and father thoughts as the month continues. We'll have to have like a dad thought, dad hypothetical of the week. But it'll be fun. I think this is a good, strong theme, and there's a lot of dad movies to choose from.
We'll have some fun ones out there, too. This ended up a little heavy. And maybe inevitably there will be some of that. Like, it's a serious part of life, but I think there's a lot of good and funny and light things about being a dad too that are worthy celebrating, and I'm hoping we will see some of those other angles on fatherhood this month. Is It Good is our signature section where we each give the movie a rating on our 8-point goodness scale, ranging from very not good, which is a 1 out of 8, to our masterpiece rating toward to good, which is an 8 out of 8. We'll do Dad from 1989 first. Brian, is Dad good?
As I mentioned, I left this one with generally positive feelings. I think it does a good job of making you care about this dad, making you feel for the various generations of this family. It didn't grab me and win me over to the same extent that Parenthood did. When we watched that one, I gave it a 7. And as we've been talking about it here in the episode, some of the shine of Dad has actually worn off for me. It is pretty episodic and all over the place. There's a lot of like hairpin turns in the emotional turn and where the father is at in terms of his health. I think maybe that could be true to life. You have close calls, you have scares that you can come back from. I think I'm going to give it a high 4, a good-ish. And we rate on an 8-point scale. I think in the paragraph spiel that Dan reads, it probably said that. But yeah, that's where I'm at, 4.
Good-ish, yeah. So I'm also going to give this a 4, a good-ish. My take on Dad is that pretty much what I've already said, which is that parts of it work really well, and parts of it don't work really well. And for me, the parts that didn't work were the slightly sillier final act when he's living this other life or whatever. I was kind of pretty solidly good up until maybe past the midway point. Even like it almost felt pornographic isn't the right word, like exploitative. The way that it shows like the Jack Lemmon character, like, I don't know, like seizing and like, I don't know, just being the physical specimen of elderly decrepitude. It was tough to watch in a way that it felt like it was really trying to push buttons, almost over sentimental, I guess. But even that, it's kind of still more or less worked because, like you said, it's like that's part of life, and that's kind of what this is showing is that you have that. But then, yeah, it kind of spins out a little bit in the final act. I'm kind of near a 5, but I'm at a high end 4, so that's a good-ish from me on Dad.
Yeah, we're in the same spot. You said pornographic. Neither of the old men in these movies ever end up naked, but we are still stuck in the genre trend of movies about the ravages of age. We haven't escaped it. We're still watching God, I Wish I Were Younger movies. I'm an old, gross person, and I wish I weren't.
I don't think you're that old and gross, Brian. No, I'm just kidding. I know. That was a genre label, not a statement.
Correct. But thank you, Dan.
And then we have from 2020, The Father. I didn't even say the director of The Father. Let me go ahead and say it here. It is directed by Florian Zeller. Only directed 2 films. Brian, this is great. Do you know the name of the other film that Florian Zeller directed?
Oh, gosh. I feel like I've heard the name before, but I couldn't tell you. What is it?
His first film was The Father from 2020. His second film was The Son from 2022. That's right.
Okay.
It stars Hugh Jackman.
Is it a sequel in any way?
I don't think so.
I guess it couldn't be.
That one got a lot worse reviews than The Father. I didn't see it when it came out. And the play that it is based off of...
Oh, you know Florian Zeller, he makes family member movies.
The Sister, The Next Door Neighbor. I don't know what else. You could get The Brother-in-Law. What's the most obscure relative that you have a relationship with, Brian?
Oh, gosh. I have some second cousins that I keep up with. I think that's the extent of it.
Yeah.
What about you?
Same approximate radius as second cousins, like cousins once removed, and I know a couple of second cousins. Not well, but yeah. Where was I?
I think we still need to rate The Father.
I think the original play was actually by Florian Zeller as well. I think he wrote the original play. Anyways, is The Father good, Brian?
I'm going to give it a very good. A 6 and a pretty high 6. Really powerful performance from Anthony Hopkins, and the way that the film is executed is really creative. Definitely puts you in that unsettling, unstable mindset. As a result, it's like hard to cling to anything in the film. You come away having had this experience, but it's like, how do you even tell people about it? Other than it's really weird and confusing, and I wouldn't want to be in that place. So that's where I land. What are you feeling?
Yeah, I think I'm in a similar place to you. I did struggle with it. Like, I don't really have any complaints about its execution of its ideas. The one thing that I mentioned is that really threw me off is like it felt almost time travel-y. Like, Brian, if we had stretched Time Loop Month out to like 6 months instead of 1 month, and we were really starting to hit the dregs, I would have tried to spin The Father as a time loop movie, because it has some of like, you see scenes from different angles and they repeat themselves. And so it sort of feels like a time loop, feels like it has time travel.
Now that would have been a good trick if we had started Time Loop Month and then just never stopped. And then if anybody commented on it on the Discord, we'd say, what are you talking about?
The real time loop was the theme months we made along the way. Something like that. I'm going to just like barely inch into exceptionally good. And I'm going to sleep on whether that really should be a 6 rather than a 7, just because it doesn't... I think you're right. It maybe could give you a little bit more to latch on, but man, was I like just stunned by this and the way that it tells its story in a way that I've never seen before. And like it manages to feel scary and disorienting, but also still feels like a moving drama and not a genre film at all. I don't know. I think it's an outstanding piece of writing. I think it's just a sensational piece of acting and the editing, man, really great stuff. Like I feel like if I were doing my 2020, every year I do like my version of the Oscars on my film review site, thegoodsreviews.com. I feel like, honestly, the editing, the acting of both of the leads here would be like among my best of the year. Just because I think it just does something so unique and really touching and really moving. I'm going to give this an exceptionally good. It's a tough watch, but it's a powerful one, and I definitely recommend The Father. And Dad is kind of a situational watch. It's if you like 80s dramedies, if you like Ted Danson, if you like these movies where these old comedians to get one last dramatic role, go for Dad too. So
if you like bloody piss, great movie for that.
Boy, are you going to be excited. I got the movie for you, pal.
But Father definitely has that horror movie element. Like the way that he'll come around a corner and there'll be a random guy there. Like that's kind of the essence of horror. What if there was a guy there? And
maybe you're right.
I remember one time that I walked into the kitchen and my dad had shaved his mustache off, and I had never in my life seen him without a mustache. And for an instant, I just thought there was a random guy standing in the middle of the kitchen, and I like screamed. And then I put together that it was my dad. But I mean I can understand how that would be terrifying.
I like the way that you just described horror. Why is that guy there? It's the essence of horror. I'm going to be thinking about that one. What are we going to be watching for week number 2 of Dad Month, Brian?
Okay, so it's not horror exactly, but it's the one that jumped out to me when I thought, what's a movie that has Dad in the title? And a great thing about theme months is it lets me pick movies I haven't necessarily seen before, because a lot of the episodes that I pick tend to be movies that I've seen that I have something to say about. Here is more of a chance to kind of throw a dart at the map and see where it lands. I want to watch Ghost Dad from 1990 starring Bill Cosby, Dan.
May God have mercy on our souls, Brian.
So we're definitely going to get the chance to kind of talk some more problematic actors. I thought about doing a double feature of my own, maybe throw this one on with Mom and Dad Save the World, starring Jeffrey Jones.
Too much problematic actors.
I think Ghost Dad is going to keep us busy enough.
I'm going to try really hard to... I don't think my next pick has any canceled actors in it, Brian. I could be wrong. We'll see. All right, Brian, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, you know, it's like it's a comedy. It's got a ghost in it. You know I got to pick the thing that's got a ghost in it.
Yeah, for sure. I'm definitely curious about this one. This is one of those relics, so I'll go give it a look. Ghost Dad.
All right,
Brian. Have a good one. Thanks for chatting dads with me, and I'll see you next week.
This was fun. Thanks everybody for tuning in.
Bye.